The elderly couple pushed open the rotting mansion doors, dust swirling like ghosts. They'd spent their last $250 to buy the condemned property, hoping for a fresh start. But the moment they stepped inside, they froze. On the floor lay a trail of muddy footprints, fresh. A faint metallic smell filled the air. Then they heard a whisper from upstairs. The old man grabbed his wife's hand. She whispered, "This house isn't empty." They dialed 911, trembling. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. The eviction notice was still taped crooked on the door when they left the apartment for the last time. It fluttered in the weak morning breeze, a cheap piece of paper with cold ink that had the power to erase decades of memories. The landlord didn't even come in person this time. He'd mailed it, then sent some young man with a measuring tape to inspect the place for the next tenants who could afford what they no longer could. Clarence pulled the door shut gently, like he was afraid of waking something up. His hands were rough and wrinkled, knuckles darkened from years of work in warehouses, kitchens, and on other people's roofs. 68, and when he looked at his fingers, he could still see himself as a boy holding a hammer for his daddy. Now those hands held 2 battered suitcases and a folded lawn chair. Beside him, his wife Evelyn locked the bottom bolt and just stared at the peeling number screwed into the wood. 23, she murmured. "We've been at this address longer than most folks keep a marriage." Her voice wasn't angry, just tired, soft. That kind of tired that sinks into your bones, past the joints and straight into the soul. She was 66, small and sturdy, with silver streak braids tied back in a scarf that had been white once, long ago. Her eyes were gentle, but lines of worry curved permanently at the corners. Those lines had names: overdue notice, past due rent, prescription refill, food bill. "Come on now, Evie," Clarence said quietly, shifting the weight of the suitcase. "Ain't nothing left inside but echoes." She gave the door one last look, pressing her palm flat against it, as if saying goodbye to an old friend who had turned on them without wanting to. "You remember when we first moved in?" she asked. "I remember it was the first time we had hot water without having to pray over it," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You cooked that chicken stew in that little pot and acted like we owned the whole block." "We did. In my mind, we did." She sniffed and straightened her shoulders. "All right, I'm ready." They walked down the stairwell together, their steps slow, coordinated, the way you walk when you've been walking beside the same person for almost 50 years. Neighbors pretended not to watch from cracked doors. Some eyes held pity. Some held relief that it wasn't them. On the sidewalk, the city sounded louder. Cars passing too fast, a bus sighing at the corner, a dog barking behind a fence. The world never paused for anybody's heartbreak. Clarence set the suitcases down for a moment and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, smoothing it out with careful fingers. Dot. "Let's go over it again," he said, more to steady himself than her. "You saw the ad where?" "Online." Evelyn dug into her bag, retrieving a crumpled printout. "The community board. One of them city surplus listings folks barely look at." The headline was still visible despite the wrinkles. Abandoned property auction. Starting price, $250. Underneath was a grainy black and white photo of a grand old mansion. Wide stone steps, pillars, windows like sleepy eyes. The kind of house people slowed down to stare at, convinced it was haunted or holy. "Probably a typo," she had said when she first showed him. Can't no big ol' thing like that be $250? But Clarence had checked. He'd taken the bus downtown, stood in line at an office with glass partitions, and asked questions in that careful way of his. Polite, but persistent. Turned out, it wasn't a mistake. The house had been in legal limbo for years. No known heirs, back taxes, structural damage. Classified as condemned but recoverable. The city had filed it under a rare, dusty statute. If someone paid the minimum handling fee, signed a mountain of waivers acknowledging risk, and promised to bring it up to basic code within a certain time frame, it was theirs. No down payment, no mortgage approval, no credit score judgment. Just $250. The sum of the last of what they had, tucked in a worn envelope under their mattress until that morning. You sure about this, Evie? Clarence asked now, even though he'd asked before. Ain't no shame in staying at Miss Lillian's spare room a while. Save up a little. Wait for something smaller. Evelyn's fingers curled around the handle of her suitcase. I'm tired of smaller, she said softly. Tired of squeezing a whole life into little places somebody else can take from us. With one paper and a stamp. She looked up at him, eyes shining but steady. I want to wake up in a place they can't just push us out of, Clarence. Even if it got holes in the roof and ghosts in the attic. I want to die in a home that got our name on it, not a landlord's. He held her gaze a long time, the corners of his mouth tightening. Then he nodded once. All right then, he said. Let's go see our haunted mansion. They dragged their suitcases to the bus stop. An old couple, with everything they owned, packed into 4 wheels and worn fabric. People glanced and then looked away. The world didn't know or didn't care that this was the moment between we used to and we're trying again. The bus driver recognized them when they climbed on, the same route they'd ridden for years to get to jobs that paid just enough to keep them tired. Mornin', Mr. Green. Miss Evelyn, he greeted. You two going someplace special? Clarence hesitated. Evelyn spoke first. Yeah, she said, lifting her chin. We are. The driver smiled and didn't press. Sometimes, respect sounded like not asking more. They sat side by side, suitcases wedged in the aisle, as the city rolled past in a blur of brick and glass. The closer they got to the old neighborhood where the mansion stood, the quieter it seemed to become. Fewer stores, fewer people, more boarded windows and cracked sidewalks. You think we crazy? Evelyn asked, half laughing, half serious. Oh, absolutely, Clarence replied. But we been crazy together this long? Might as well keep going. She nudged his arm gently. Long as you say we. He slid his hand over hers and squeezed. The bus dropped them off 3 blocks from the property. They walked the rest of the way, rolling their suitcases along uneven pavement, past overgrown lots and houses that sagged under the weight of neglect. And then there it was. Even ruined, it was magnificent. The mansion rose up at the end of the street like something from another time. Stone walls, streaked with years of rain. Windows covered with dusty boards. Iron gate hanging crooked on one hinge. Ivy crawled up the sides, clinging to the cracks as if trying to hold the building together. Evelyn stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Lord, she whispered. Look at it. Clarence stared, his chest tight. Big, he managed. Much bigger than that little printout made it look. You scared? She asked, not unkindly. Terrified, he said honestly. You? Terrified, she echoed. Then she smiled. We finally match. They walked through the open side of the gate, the metal complaining with a sharp squeal as it shifted. A broken stone lion lay on its side, near the walkway, face half buried in weeds, as if even the statues had grown tired. Clarence set down the suitcases and squinted up at the imposing front. "Can't believe this cost the same as a couple of grocery trips," he murmured. "Groceries don't give you a deed." Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out the official-looking paper they'd gotten from the city office, and unfolded it with the same care she would use for a baby blanket. The words blurred a little, but she could make out the important part: their names. Her fingers traced them slowly. "Clarence Green and Evelyn Green," she read quietly. "Owners." The words settled over them like a blessing. She tucked the document back into its envelope and slipped it into an inside pocket close to her heart. "I know it's broken," she said. "I know it's dirty. I know we got more work ahead of us than these bodies gonna like. But this is ours." Clarence picked up the small bundle they'd brought for the first day: worn brooms, a box of contractor bags, rubber gloves, an old ragged mop. He looked like a soldier going into battle, with nothing but stubbornness and cheap armor. "So we start today," he said. "One room at a time, one nail at a time, one prayer at a time." She nodded, but as they climbed the cracked front steps, an involuntary shiver ran through her. Maybe it was the wind slipping through broken places. Maybe it was something else. The air around the house felt different, thicker, charged, like a held breath. "Feels like it's watching us," she said, under her breath. "Just feels like a place that remembers being full," Clarence replied, more to convince himself than her. "Houses don't like being empty." He pushed on the front door. It groaned open with a long, low creak, exhaling stale air and dust into their faces. They stepped inside together. The foyer was dim, lit only by light sneaking in through cracks and broken panes. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved and elegant, now coated in grime. A chandelier hung above, missing half its crystals, cobwebs draped over it like forgotten lace. Evelyn's eyes widened. "You see this?" she whispered. "You remember that little apartment bathroom? I had to turn sideways just to close." "We'll fix it," Evelyn said firmly, almost to the house itself. "Might take us the rest of our lives, but we'll bring you back." Clarence patted the newel post as if greeting an old friend. "We ain't asking you to be perfect," he added, "just strong enough to keep us warm and dry." They didn't know, couldn't know, that beneath their feet lay more than cracked wood and dust, that behind walls and under floors, secrets older than both of them were quietly waiting. They only knew this: they had finally stepped into a place no one could evict them from. They had come with hope, brooms, and tired backs. And the mansion, heavy with its own history, seemed to sigh in response. Somewhere deep inside its bones, something shifted, the way a sleeping giant might turn over, still dreaming, not yet awake. They thought they were just cleaning. They had no idea they were walking straight into the story that would change everything. The second morning came with a cold breeze and a sky the color of worn steel. Clarence woke up first, stiff from sleeping on an inflatable mattress that had been losing air since midnight. Evelyn lay curled beside him under a patchwork quilt, the kind she'd sewn back when their daughter used to bring home stray kittens and wrap them up like little burritos. Clarence watched her breath rise and fall, the gentle rhythm grounding him. They had slept inside the mansion's front room, the only space cleared enough to lay their things. The rest of the house sat untouched, heavy with darkness and history. He eased himself up, wincing as his knees cracked loud enough to echo. Evelyn stirred. "That bed deflated again?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Think it's trying to tell us something," he replied. "Maybe my bones ain't meant for camping no more." She chuckled, pushing herself into a sitting position. "Your bones been complainin' since you were 40. He kissed her forehead lightly before standing. "Well, let's go see what today got in store." They washed their faces with bottled water and wiped down with damp cloths, a routine they'd perfected over years of stretching dollars farther than they should have gone. Evelyn tied her scarf again, smoothed her shirt, and checked the deed in her pocket, out of habit, the way people check for keys or wallets. The house was still quiet. Too quiet. Clarence picked up the broom and the roll of heavy-duty trash bags. "Let's start with the kitchen today," he said. "Feels like a room that might still got some dignity left." Evelyn smiled softly. "You always think kitchens got dignity, even haunted ones." They walked carefully down the hallway, stepping over warped boards and piles of dust. Sunlight filtered through cracks like thin golden knives, cutting across faded wallpaper that once must have been grand. She reached out, brushing a finger across the peeling pattern. "Whoever lived here, they must have loved this house once," she murmured. Clarence nodded, but didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the front door. It was closed. He was sure they'd left it closed last night, but something about the angle looked different. He shook the thought off, blaming fatigue. The kitchen, when they entered it, was a graveyard of what once had been elegance. Marble counters cracked like old bone, cabinets hanging from one hinge, dust lying thick on every surface. But one thing stopped them both. The counter wasn't completely dust-covered. In the middle of the grime, something sat, fresh. Evelyn's breath hitched. "That's not ours." The bread was still soft, edges not even hardened. A smear of mustard glistened faintly. Clarence moved closer, his jaw tightening. "Somebody's been in here." He turned slowly, scanning the room. Evelyn whispered, "You think squatters been living here?" "Maybe," he said, "or someone passing through." But even he didn't believe his own words. She pointed suddenly to the floor by the back door. "Clarence, look, footprints, fresh ones. Mud from the yard, tracking inward in long strides. Not theirs, not the neighbors." Clarence swallowed hard. "They look recent. And look at this." She bent down gingerly, picking up a cigarette butt from the old wooden floor. Still warm. He took it from her with a rag. "Someone stood here, maybe last night." Evelyn felt a chill creep up her spine. "We should have listened to Mr. Jenkins." Their neighbor had been wary yesterday, hesitating before speaking. "I hear things in that house," he had said. "You two should be careful. Some shadows ain't just from the sun." Clarence had laughed it off then. Now, standing in the kitchen with a stranger's footprints at their feet, his smile faded. "We ain't staying here another night till we figure out what's going on," he decided firmly. But Evelyn was already shaking her head. "If someone was here last night, they could have heard us," she whispered. "But they didn't. Whoever it is, maybe they're scared too." Clarence stared at her. "Evie, you got too much heart. This ain't about kindness, it's about safety." She pressed her lips together. She knew he was right, but something in her, a mother's instinct, a caregiver's spirit, refused to immediately fear the unknown. They stepped outside, into the yard to breathe fresher air. The grass was knee-high, swaying in the wind like it was trying to warn them. A bird watched them from the porch railing, head tilted. Mr. Jenkins appeared from behind his fence, carrying a weed trimmer. "Mornin'," he called. "Mornin'," Clarence replied. Jenkins approached, wiping his brow. "You two look like you seen a ghost." "We might have seen something real enough," Clarence answered. "Footprints, fresh food, somebody's living in there." Jenkins frowned deeply. "I told y'all I've heard noises for weeks. Thought it was raccoons at first. But some nights you can hear whispering, moving around." Evelyn clutched her arms around herself. Clarence asked, "You ever see who it is?" Jenkins shook his head. "No, but I've seen shadows pass the windows after midnight." The old couple exchanged a glance. Clarence sighed. "Well, we came to clean a home, not fight anybody. We'll go through proper channels. Ask the police for a check." Jenkins nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the mansion. "Just be careful. Folks get desperate in places like this." Clarence thanked him and started back toward the house. But Evelyn stayed rooted, staring at the upstairs window. The one right above the foyer. The curtain moved. Not wind, not accident. Slow, deliberate. Someone was watching. Her breath stilled and the world narrowed to silence. "Clarence," she whispered. He turned, saw where she was staring, and every hair on his arms rose. The curtains settled back into place, as if someone had just slipped away behind it. Clarence grabbed her hand. "We're leaving. Right now." They walked quickly to the front steps, hearts pounding. But before they reached the door, something else stopped them. A noise. A soft, dragging sound from inside the house. A slow shift of weight. Floorboards groaning under someone's steps. Evelyn whispered, "Whoever they are, they never left." The wind rose, rattling the boarded window on the side of the house. Clarence didn't like the way it sounded. Like warning. Like teeth chattering. Like something old waking up. They backed away slowly. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins put down his weed trimmer and stared. "You two okay?" Clarence shook his head. "Somebody's in our house." Jenkins frowned. "You sure?" A shadow moved behind another window. Clarence's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm sure." Evelyn's trembling hand lifted unconsciously to her chest, touching the deed hidden in her pocket. "We bought a home," she whispered, "but someone else is already living in it." And for the first time since they stepped onto the property, the mansion didn't seem like a blessing. It felt like a warning. Something was wrong inside those walls. Something alive. Something waiting. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the lawn as the old couple stood frozen on the porch. Clarence kept his body angled protectively in front of Evelyn, his eyes locked on that upstairs window where the curtain had just moved. No wind blew now. No branches tapped the siding. The house had gone still. Too still. And that silence felt like a held breath, waiting. Clarence swallowed hard. "Evie," he murmured, "don't take your eyes off the door." But Evelyn's gaze was fixed somewhere else, on the faint outline of muddy footprints on the porch boards, fresh enough to still be damp. "Clarence," she whispered shakily, "those weren't here yesterday." He followed her line of sight, 3 steps of prints that stopped right at the doorway. Whoever had been inside didn't sneak in from the back. They'd come through the front, and left through the front. Maybe while they slept. Maybe while they dreamed of a fresh start. A cold shiver ran down Clarence's spine. "We ain't staying here no more today," he said firmly. "We're calling somebody, getting this checked out proper." Before Evelyn could answer, Mr. Jenkins called from across the yard, already marching toward them, tension stiffening his shoulders. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing from the couple to the house. "I saw your faces. Something wrong?" Clarence opened his mouth, and then it happened. A sharp slam echoed from inside the house. Loud, final, violent. All three of them froze. Then another slam. A door upstairs. Then a second door. And a third. Slam, slam, slam. The sound rattled the old frames, shaking dust from the eaves. Jenkins stumbled back, eyes wide. Jesus, there's somebody in there! Evelyn grabbed Clarence's arm, clutching it so tight her knuckles whitened. Her voice trembled. Clarence, they're moving through the house! Floorboards creaked overhead. Long, heavy steps passing from one room to another. Slow, purposeful. Not the sound of someone panicking or running. The sound of someone who had been there a long time. Someone who knew the layout. Someone who wasn't afraid of being discovered. Clarence's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Instinct screamed at him to get Evelyn away, to run, but something inside him rooted his feet in place. A mixture of fury, fear, and the sudden realization that they weren't intruding on an abandoned home. They had walked into someone's territory. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Evelyn, though he didn't move forward. Jenkins pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." Evelyn finally found her voice. "Do it fast!" He pressed the screen with shaking fingers. But before he could speak, a noise cut through the air. A soft tap against the upstairs window. Not a knock, not a bang. A deliberate tap. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The curtain shifted, just a fraction, enough to see a shadow behind it. A human shape, watching. Jenkins gasped, "Oh my God, there's someone up there." Clarence felt the weight of that gaze. His voice came out rough. "Evie, we're leaving. Now." But just as he took Evelyn's arm to pull her back down the steps, the front door creaked, slowly, painfully, as if an unseen hand inside the house was pushing it open. The hinges wailed. Dust lifted. Clarence stepped backward, shielding Evelyn with his body. Jenkins stumbled down the walkway, phone still in his hand, eyes locked on the widening crack of the door. The door opened halfway. Wind didn't push it. Nothing natural did. No face appeared. No figure emerged. Just the open mouth of the house, dark and hollow, as though silently inviting them back inside. Clarence's breath came short and sharp. "I'm telling you right now," he whispered, "we ain't going in that house." Jenkins finally found his voice and yelled into the phone. "There's someone inside the property, 142 Maple Street. Send officers now, please." Evelyn's entire body trembled as she clung to Clarence's arm. "Whoever it is," she whispered, "they didn't run." "No," Clarence said grimly, "they didn't. And they're not afraid." "No," he repeated softly, "they ain't afraid at all." The house loomed over them, silent again, as if satisfied that it had made its point. Jenkins kept pacing, muttering prayers under his breath. Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice a fragile thread. "Clarence, we came here thinking it was just an old house. But this place, something's wrong. This ain't just a squatter." Clarence didn't disagree, because deep in his gut, in that primal space where instincts whisper truths you'd rather not acknowledge, he knew it too. This wasn't normal. This wasn't random. This wasn't someone who just wandered in to sleep on the floor. Felt like someone who had been living there. Someone who believed the house was theirs. Someone who didn't want company. And someone who was watching them right now, from behind those dusty curtains, or from some shadowed corner inside. Sirens began faintly in the distance. Jenkins sighed in shaky relief. "They're coming." Clarence didn't take his eyes off the dark doorway. "Good," he muttered. 'Cause whatever's in that house, it's been there a while." Evelyn gripped his hand. "And it doesn't want us here." The sirens grew louder as the scene froze in tension. The old couple trembling on the porch, the neighbor backing away, and the mansion's dark doorway yawning open, as if something inside had finally noticed it was no longer alone. They thought buying a house would be a fresh start, but the house had secrets. And those secrets were awake. The old couple stood beside Jenkins' mailbox as police cars rolled to a stop, lights flashing red and blue across the peeling mansion walls. Evelyn clung to Clarence's arm, still trembling, still staring at the open front door, like it might swallow them whole. Officer Elena Brooks stepped out of the first cruiser, tall, focused, steady. She had the eyes of someone who had seen enough darkness to recognize it instantly. "What happened?" she asked, voice calm but alert. Clarence pointed to the mansion. "There's someone inside. They moving around, slamming doors, watching us from the upstairs window." Elena followed his gaze. The curtain where the shadow had lingered now hung completely still. Too still. She nodded. "Stay back. Don't go near the house." Two more officers advanced toward the porch, cautiously, guns drawn but lowered. Evelyn gripped Clarence's hand. "Clarence, what if they're still in there?" He squeezed back, voice low. "I ain't got no doubt they are." Elena lifted her radio. "Unit 3, breach from the back. Unit 2, follow me from the front." They moved like shadows, slipping through the doorway Clarence and Evelyn had been too afraid to cross. For the first time since the slamming doors, the mansion was silent. No footsteps, no creaks, no movement. Just a heavy, suffocating quiet. Minutes passed like hours. Jenkins paced the yard, whispering, "They're taking too long. That ain't good. That ain't good at all." Evelyn wrung her hands. "What if they're hurt? What if—" Clarence put a hand on her shoulder. "They know what they're doing. Let 'em work." But even he couldn't hide the worry tightening his jaw. Then finally, Elena reappeared at the doorway. Her expression was unreadable. She walked toward them with slow, heavy steps, and that alone made Clarence's stomach churn. Something was wrong. She stopped just feet away and took a breath. "We found evidence," she said. "A lot of it." Clarence frowned. "What kind of evidence?" Elena exchanged a grave glance with her partner before answering. "There's no single person living there," she said quietly. "There were several." Evelyn gasped. "Oh, Lord." Elena continued, voice steady but serious. "We found multiple sleeping bags, 3, maybe 4, along with crates of electronics, laptops, tablets, boxed phones. Some were half open, like they were being prepared for resale." Clarence's brow tightened in confusion. "You mean robbers? Thieves?" Elena shook her head. "That's what we thought at first, but then we found the basement." Even Jenkins froze mid-step. Clarence's voice dropped to a whisper. "What was in the basement?" Elena hesitated, a first sign that whatever she saw disturbed even a trained officer. "It's a room," she said quietly. "A small hidden room, boarded up behind old shelves. When we forced the boards off—" She paused, gathering the words. "We found equipment, printers, cutting tools, high-end scanners, hard drives, files, IDs." "IDs?" Evelyn whispered. Elena nodded grimly. "Fake ones. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some partially made, some already finished. Credit cards, driver's licenses, all with different names, but the same faces." Jenkins cursed under his breath. Clarence's heart thudded hard. "So someone's been stealing people's identities?" "Not someone," Elena corrected softly. A group, a coordinated group. Evelyn took a shaky step backward. In our house? Elena nodded. Yes. Your mansion was being used as a base for identity theft, bank fraud, and probably more. Whoever was living there was running a full-scale operation. Clarence blinked hard, trying to process the words. But that don't make sense, he stammered. We only bought this place yesterday. Who were these people? Why this house? Elena inhaled deeply. That's what makes it worse. The couple stared at her, dread rising like cold water up their legs. Elena continued softly. We found personal documents that don't belong to any of the suspects we know. Bank statements, insurance forms, medical bills, stolen mail. Some of it addressed to folks in this neighborhood. Some from other counties entirely. Jenkins shook his head. This is bigger than I thought. Evelyn whispered. But officers, we searched every inch, Elena said. Every room, every closet, every corner. They were gone before we arrived. All the color drained from Evelyn's face. How? She whispered. We were watching every door. Jenkins swallowed hard. There's only one way they could have gotten out. Clarence finished the sentence for him. The tunnels. Elena raised an eyebrow. You know about them? Jenkins nodded. Old rumor round here. Way back, the original owner was paranoid. Folks say he built escape tunnels under the house. Everyone thought it was just talk. Elena exhaled. Well, she said finally, it wasn't talk. Clarence and Evelyn stared, stunned. Elena continued. We found a hidden passage beneath the basement floor, a narrow tunnel leading under the property. Fresh tracks inside. They must have escaped when they heard you approaching. Evelyn put a hand over her mouth. My God, Clarence. Those people were living under us. Clarence pulled her close. It's over now. Police are here. They ain't coming back. But as Elena spoke again, the comfort slipped from his voice. I'm sorry, she said gently, but we can't guarantee that. We need to secure this property, fully investigate the tunnels, and check for any remaining suspects. Until then, you can't stay here. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. We just wanted a home. Elena's expression softened, deeply. I know, she said, and for the first time her voice carried emotion. And you will have one. But right now, you may have accidentally uncovered a criminal operation we've been trying to pin down for months. You didn't just report a squatter. You found a crime hub. Clarence's throat tightened. You mean? I mean, Elena said firmly. You may have just broken open a major case. The old couple looked at each other, fear, confusion, disbelief swirling in their eyes. Evelyn whispered, We bought a house. Clarence finished her thought, and walked right into a nightmare. Elena gently touched Evelyn's shoulder, her voice softer than before. Maybe a nightmare, she said, but also maybe a blessing in disguise. We're not done investigating, and there's more inside that belongs to you than you think. Clarence frowned. What do you mean? Elena gave a small sigh, and gave him something to say. You will learn that. And he glared, a dark, cold whispered inside his voice. That all came back to Elena. She carefully imagined it. You never know what might happen. If you were behind that same painting, all you do know is see it, believe it. You've been there yourself. The cold winter storm seems to dwell in happiness. Your blessings, and they've made their gifts you can't imagine. But don't worry, because it's there, and that came back. So be open. Don't stop and wonder. There'll be Godzilla guns in the sewer, but this 4 corners from where they came, and it will be dark, painful. Just be here. You've been through it. Now you know what's inside here. And the next time We do a deep dive into the past? Be here. The living room had become a command center. Yellow tape stretched across the front door. Officers moved in and out with boxes, cameras, evidence bags. Wires snaked from laptops, on card tables, to power outlets that hadn't seen use in years. Radios crackled softly as voices from other units checked in, reported, confirmed. Clarence sat on an old wooden chair near the wall, back straight, hands folded tight between his knees. Evelyn sat beside him on a dusty trunk the officers had dragged in from the basement, her feet barely touching the floor. They looked like two people who had wandered into the wrong movie and didn't know how to leave. Outside, neighbors had gathered behind the tape, their faces pressed with curiosity and fear. Someone whispered, "They just moved in yesterday." Another muttered, "That place always had bad energy." Inside, Officer Elena Brooks leaned against the doorway, her expression unreadable. They looked so small in that big, broken room. Detective Ramirez entered, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a folder in his hand. He nodded to Elena, then glanced at Clarence and Evelyn. "You've been through a lot today," he said gently. "This is bigger than most people sign up for when they buy a fixer-upper." Clarence let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Bigger than needs a coat of paint, that's for sure." Ramirez gave a faint smile, then his expression sobered. "I'm going to walk you through what we know so far," he said, pulling a chair to face them. "Some of this will sound unbelievable, but it's all been building around this house for months, years even. You just happened to..." Ramirez opened the folder. "For the last 8 months," he began, "we've been tracking a network responsible for identity theft, bank fraud, and money laundering in 3 counties. They steal mail, create fake documents, open accounts, drain savings. Regular people, working folks, seniors, immigrants, anyone who seems like they won't fight back." Evelyn shivered. "That's evil," she murmured. "It is," Ramirez agreed. "We'd linked several fraudulent accounts to this part of town, but never had a solid location. Just whispers, patterns, dead ends." He looked toward the ceiling, as if seeing through the floors to the hidden rooms beneath. "Turns out," he continued, "whoever was running this didn't just want a hideout. They wanted a place nobody would notice. Somewhere written off, ignored, a house the city forgot about." Clarence followed his gaze. "You're saying they chose this place 'cause nobody cared about it?" Ramirez nodded slowly. "But they didn't expect anyone to buy it. When you two walked in, they probably thought you were trespassers. Then, they heard you moving around, cleaning, talking. They panicked, grabbed what they could, and escaped through the tunnel." Evelyn shook her head, trying to imagine herself asleep on that half-deflated mattress, while criminals crept under her floorboards. "How long were they here?" she asked. Ramirez flipped a page. "Based on the food, the clothing, the electronics, we're guessing months, possibly a year or more." Clarence's jaw tightened. "In our house," he said quietly. The word house, carrying all the weight of their hope. Elena stepped forward. "Sir," she said, "that's the thing I wanted to explain. It's not just our house or their hideout. This place has history, and a lot more tied to it than you knew when you paid that $250. Her tone had shifted. The room felt different, like something was about to tilt. Evelyn eyed the trunk she was sitting on. "Then what is it?" she asked. Ramirez nodded toward the trunk. "That," he said, "is where the story really starts." Elena stepped closer and rested a hand gently on the lid, respectful, almost reverent. "We found this in a locked storage section in the basement," she said. "The criminals didn't touch it. Maybe they didn't find it. Maybe they didn't care. Either way, it was sealed, untouched. Clarence frowned. If it was sealed, how'd you open it? Ramirez lifted a small metal object from his folder and placed it in Clarence's palm. It was a key, old but polished, with a tag that had the mansion's long-forgotten address etched faintly into the metal. "We found the key behind a loose brick," Ramirez said. "Whoever hid it wanted it found by someone who cared enough to look deeper. And this trunk belonged to the original owner." Evelyn adjusted her weight on the lid, suddenly careful not to shift it too much. "Who was he?" she asked. "Name was Franklin Delaney," Elena said. "He built this house in the early 1900s. Genius investor. Quiet, private. Didn't marry. No children. People in town said he was odd, but generous in quiet ways." Ramirez nodded. "He lost a lot of his family in ugly ways. Land theft, bad deals, discrimination. He spent his later years buying back land and investments, vowing not to let what was taken stay stolen. When he died, he flicked another page and pulled out a photocopy of an old document. He left a will." Evelyn and Clarence leaned forward. "The will says," Ramirez read slowly, "that if no direct heir could be identified, this property and anything inside it would pass by law to whoever legally purchased the estate after abandonment." Meaning, he looked up, meeting Evelyn's eyes first. "Whoever paid that $250, signed those city papers, and took responsibility for this house." His gaze shifted deliberately to Clarence. "Inherits everything that was left behind in Mr. Delaney's storage." Clarence's throat went dry. "You're saying," Elena finished for him. "We're saying this trunk and what's inside it belongs to you." Evelyn's eyes welled up immediately. "No," she whispered automatically, shaking her head. "No, that can't be right. We just two old folks who got pushed out our apartment last week. Somebody like him ain't thinking of somebody like us." But Elena leaned in, her voice gentler now. "Ms. Green, Mr. Green, Mr. Delaney didn't know your names, but he knew hurt. He knew what it meant to lose what should have been yours. That's why he wrote it like that. Not for blood, for principle." She placed her hand more firmly on the trunk lid. "You bought the house. You signed the documents. No tricks, no lies. That makes you the legal inheritors. Not the city, not the criminals. You." It was too big to take in all at once. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ramirez nodded to the trunk. "We didn't want to go any further without you here," he said. "We opened it enough to see what we're dealing with. But the rest?" He glanced at them. "It should be open with you." Clarence looked at Evelyn. Her scarf had slipped slightly, silver hair glinting under the dusty chandelier light. Her eyes, tired for so long, were suddenly bright with something fragile and dangerous. Hope. "You ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I've been ready for something good my whole life," she said. Ramirez stepped aside. Elena turned the key in the trunk's lock. The sound was small, but final. The latch clicked. The air seemed to thicken. Together, Clarence and Evelyn lifted the heavy lid. Inside, instead of old clothes or broken heirlooms, were stacks of envelopes, bundled with fading twine, leather folders, an old metal box with numbers etched on the lid. Evelyn picked up one of the envelopes. It was thick. Her fingers trembled as she slid it open. A check slid out. Her breath left her body. "Clarence," she whispered. He took the paper from her hand and stared, eyes wide. It was a dividend check, issued decades ago, never cashed. The amount made his head swim. He reached into the trunk again, pulling out another envelope. Then another. Blood pounded in his ears as number after number crowded his vision. All large, all unclaimed. "Are these real?" he asked hoarsely. Ramirez nodded. "We ran several of them through the system before bringing you in. The companies still exist. Their records show the accounts were never closed, never flagged. Legally, these are part of your inherited estate." Evelyn began to cry. Not the pretty, delicate kind of crying that people dabbed away with tissues in movies. The deep, raw kind that shook her whole frame. The kind that came from a lifetime of counting every dollar, stretching every meal, praying every month that the numbers would line up. "We ain't never had more than a couple $100 to our name at once," she choked. "And now this? After all this time?" Clarence's vision blurred. He thought of all the nights they'd shared one plate of food and told each other they weren't hungry. Of rent increases, of letters with red ink, of standing in line at the clinic with coins in his pocket and shame in his lungs. He thought of the eviction notice still hanging on that old apartment door. And now, in this ruined mansion, surrounded by dust and crime tape, they were being told that they had stumbled into a fortune. Elena reached into the trunk and carefully lifted something else. A weathered, handwritten letter tied with a thin blue ribbon. She unfolded it gently and read aloud. "To whoever gives this home life again." Evelyn's crying slowed. Clarence listened, almost afraid to breathe. "I cannot know your name," Elena continued, voice soft but steady. "But I know you're kind. You will not be the one who came for the money. You will be the one who came for shelter, for a place to belong, for walls that don't push you out." Her voice shook a little, so she cleared her throat and went on. "This house has seen greed, yes, but it has also seen kindness. I was not always the man I should have been, but I have known what it feels like to lose what is yours because someone richer said it never belonged to you." Clarence and Evelyn exchanged a look that needed no words. "If you are reading this," Elena read, "then the law has done what I hoped. It has placed this place, and what remains of my estate, into the hands of those who know struggle." She looked at them, then back at the paper. "I ask only one thing. Use what you find here, not just for comfort, but for goodness. For yourselves first. Then, if you have more, for others who carry the same scars." Silence fell over the room like a prayer. Evelyn whispered, "He wrote that for us." Clarence's voice came out gritty. "He wrote that for anybody who's been pushed around like we have." Ramirez closed the folder slowly. "We still need to process this formally," he said. "Bank confirmations, legal affirmations, estate transfers. It'll take some time, but the bottom line is clear. This is real." He gestured to the trunk. "And it's yours." Evelyn reached for Clarence's hand. Her fingers were still shaking, but when they clasped his, there was strength in them. "We just wanted a roof," she said, almost to herself. "A little kitchen, a bed that didn't deflate." Clarence looked around the room. The cracked walls, the dusty staircase, the broken chandelier. Then he looked back at his wife. Inside, quietly, in a ruined mansion filled with secrets, an old couple realized that the blessing they'd been chasing their whole lives had been waiting for them inside a broken home, abandoned by everyone else. They hadn't just uncovered a criminal operation. They had opened a door to a life they never thought they'd live. And the storm that had thrown them out of their old apartment? had accidentally rained them down, right where their miracle was buried. The police cars were gone. The blue tape had been removed. The mansion was finally silent again. But Clarence and Evelyn were not the same people who had stepped into this place that morning, with nothing but brooms and hope. They stood in the foyer for a long time after the officers left, as if stepping too far into the house might break the spell, or wake them from a dream they weren't ready to lose. The mansion felt bigger now. Not because the space had changed, but because their lives had. Clarence wandered slowly toward the trunk again, the key still warm in his pocket. Evelyn drifted behind him like a shadow, her hands clasped in front of her chest. The trunk lid remained open, its treasures catching the faint light from the broken window. Envelopes, bonds, documents, a life's worth of wealth sitting like falling stars in a wooden box. Clarence sat down on the floor, knees cracking softly. He picked up one of the envelopes again, not even the largest one, and turned it over in his hands like he was afraid it might vanish. "Evie," he whispered, voice trembling. "We really hold all this?" Evelyn lowered herself beside him, her dress folding around her like soft petals. I don't know what God's plan is," she whispered. "But something in me keeps saying, He ain't never forgot us." Clarence swallowed hard. "But what if this ain't real?" he said. "What if they come back tomorrow and tell us it was all a mistake? What if—" Evelyn touched his hand gently. "Baby, look at me." He did. She held his gaze, and for the first time in years, her eyes glowed with hope instead of exhaustion. "We've lived our whole lives waiting for bad news," she said. "We lived on fear so long, we forgot what blessings even look like." Clarence looked at the envelope again, the numbers printed on it. The name of the corporation, the old signature. Proof, hard proof. "It just feel too big," he whispered. "Too much for two people who ain't never had more than $20 left after the bills." Evelyn nodded slowly. "It's scary," she admitted. "But so was raising our kids with 2 part-time jobs. So was telling the landlord we needed 1 more week to pay rent. So was waking up wondering how we were going to make it through the month." She placed her hand over his. "We've been walking through storms together all our lives. Maybe this time, the rain done washed something good onto our doorstep." Clarence let out a shaky breath. "Evie, I'm scared of having money," he confessed quietly. "Ain't that something? Most folks scared they ain't got none, and here I am, scared that I do." Evelyn laughed softly, not mocking, but deeply understanding. "You scared 'cause money changes people," she said gently. "But baby, we already been changed by life. Hard years don't leave a soul untouched." Clarence's eyes softened. "You think we'll change? Turn into the kind of folks who forget where they came from?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered, "'cause we ain't never forgotten who we are." She shifted closer, resting her head on his shoulder, like she had done 1,000 times, through 1,000 hardships. "But I'll tell you this," she said softly. "I ain't never gon' let money turn us cold, or mean, or greedy. If God gave us this, it's 'cause He knows our hearts won't twist in the wrong direction." Clarence closed his eyes, letting her words fill him like warmth after a long winter. "And what about them criminals?" he murmured. "What if they come back?" Evelyn squeezed his arm. "We got locks. Police know our names now. We ain't alone no more." She paused. "And more important, this house ain't theirs. It's ours." Clarence lifted his head slightly, letting his gaze travel across the dusty foyer, up the grand staircase, toward the cracked ceiling where sunbeams filtered through. Ours. The word hit harder than the money. This place, broken, abandoned, forgotten, was theirs. No rent, he whispered. No landlord. No eviction notices slid under the door. He felt his chest constrict with emotion. No one to throw us out again. Tears slid down Evelyn's cheeks silently. I ain't never been owner of anything but a used toaster, she murmured. And now we sittin' in a mansion with enough money to fix it, and then some. Clarence let out a shaky laugh, rubbing at his face. Evie, we really gotta tell them kids. Evelyn sighed, a deep, weary sound. They ain't call us in weeks, she said softly. But maybe this ain't about them. Maybe this blessing was sent for us. Our hearts. Our rest. Clarence nodded. Yeah, maybe for once, something is about us. They fell silent again. The house creaked around them, but not ominously this time. It felt like breathing, like an old giant stretching after a long sleep. Evelyn's fingers drifted along the edge of the trunk. Clarence smiled faintly. First thing, he said, we get you a new stove. She laughed through tears. I ain't cooking on no fancy stove. Yes, you are, he said, nudging her playfully. A nice one, with them little buttons and lights you always say you don't need, but secretly want. He swatted his shoulder. You talk too much. And you love me, he grinned. Her smile returned, soft and tender. Always have, she whispered. Clarence stood up slowly and helped her to her feet. Then he did something he hadn't done in years, something life had beaten out of him long ago. He straightened his spine, lifted his chin, looked around not as a scared tenant, but as a man who owned the silence, the shadows. Evelyn slipped her hand into his. And baby, she whispered, nobody loves harder than we do. They stood together in the center of that ruined mansion, tired, poor, shaking, overwhelmed, but for the first time in decades, no longer defeated. This wasn't the end of their struggle. It was the beginning of their freedom. And tomorrow, the world would look different. The sun rose slowly the next morning, spreading soft gold across the peeling walls of the mansion. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the light, dancing through cracks in the ceiling and drifting over the couple's old coats, still piled near the doorway. Clarence woke first. He hadn't slept well. Excitement and fear twisted inside him like two stubborn vines. But for the first time in years, he didn't wake to the sound of an eviction notice slipping under the door, or the tension of wondering which bill they couldn't pay this month. He woke to the silence of ownership. Evelyn stirred beside him, still wrapped in the old quilt they kept in their car. Morning, baby, Clarence whispered. She blinked and smiled sleepily. Morning. Then she sat up slowly, touching the quilt. We really slept in our own house last night. Clarence inhaled deeply. Yeah, he said, we did. It felt unreal, like they were actors playing wealthy homeowners in a dream that no one had bothered to call cut on. He helped Evelyn to her feet, their joints cracking in unison. Let's look at it again in the daylight, she said softly. So they did. They wandered through the mansion like explorers in an ancient ruin. The morning light pushed into the rooms, revealing details they'd missed the night before. Cracked wallpaper, curling like burnt petals. A staircase still sturdy, despite its age. Tall windows, begging to be cleaned. Old chandeliers caked in dust, but shimmering beneath it. Evelyn ran her fingers over a carved banister, tracing the curves. This house, it used to be beautiful, she whispered. It still is, Clarence said, just tired, like us. She smiled at that. They entered what must have been the dining room. Tall ceilings, a broken mirror, an old wooden table, covered in dust and spiderwebs. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, imagining Sunday dinners, birthdays, grandchildren, all the things poverty had stolen from their dreams. "Clarence," she whispered, tears rising, "we could make this a home." He slipped an arm around her shoulders. "We will." A sudden knock echoed through the mansion. Clarence froze. "It ain't the criminals," Evelyn said quickly, squeezing his arm. "Police caught 'em all, remember?" He exhaled and opened the door. It was Officer Elena Brooks, the one who first believed them. She greeted them with a warm smile. "Morning, Mr. and Mrs. Walker. Mind if I step in?" "Course not," Clarence said, opening the door wider. She walked in slowly, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes sweeping over the mansion. "Looks different in daylight," she said. "It really does," Evelyn agreed. "Thank you for helping us yesterday." Officer Brooks nodded respectfully. "You two did more than you realize," she said. "Those documents you unknowingly uncovered, they bookended an entire investigation. You helped shut down a ring that hurt a lot of people." Clarence shook his head. "We didn't do nothing, just tried to clean our home." Officer Brooks smiled wider. "That humility is exactly why I'm glad the house ended up with people like you." She reached into her jacket and handed them a folder. "What's this?" Evelyn asked. "Confirmation," Brooks replied. "The legal team went through everything last night. The will is airtight. The deed transfer is binding. And the assets in that trunk, they're legally yours." Clarence's breath caught. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. "Ma'am," Clarence said softly, "we don't even know what to do with money like that." Officer Brooks shrugged gently. "Spend it, save it, fix this beautiful place, change your lives, or change someone else's." She smiled at Evelyn. "People like you, I trust you'll do good with it." Evelyn's eyes shone. "So do I." By afternoon, word had spread. Mr. Paul Jenkins, the neighbor who'd warned them, showed up first, hat in hand. "Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker, I owe y'all an apology," he said. "I should have checked on you more, should have helped sooner." Clarence shook his head. "Paul, you didn't know us." Jenkins nodded. "I want to know you now, and I want to help fix this place up. Ain't right for folks your age to be lifting heavy boards and scrubbing grime." He wasn't lying. He came back within the hour, with friends. Soon the yard filled with neighbors, folks the Walkers had never even spoken to, carrying rakes, buckets, paint, power tools, lumber, boxes of food, bags of clothing, cleaning supplies. One woman hugged Evelyn tightly. "I saw y'all on the news," she said. "We all thought that house was cursed. Turns out it was waiting on the right people." Evelyn wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You all don't have to do this." A man in overalls stepped forward, wiping his brow. "Ma'am, you spent your whole lives working. Let somebody give back for once." And leaks patched. Rooms aired for the first time in decades. The mansion sighed, as if relieved to be touched with care again. While others cleaned, Evelyn wandered into the old kitchen. It looked like a crime scene, marriages at the turn of the century, rusty oven, cracked tile, faucet dripping, cupboards hanging crooked. But she saw something no one else did. She saw home. "Clarence," she whispered, "do you remember? I always said all I wanted was a kitchen where I could cook without wondering if the gas bill was paid." Clarence kissed her forehead. "You gonna have the best one in town, Evie." She touched the counter, imagining the stove, the cabinets, the smell of cornbread baking. Warmth she hadn't felt since her children were small. For the first time since buying the mansion, she felt peace. Around sunset, as neighbors finished clearing the yard, the electric company truck pulled up. A worker stepped out holding a clipboard. You the new owners? He asked. Yes, sir, Clarence said proudly. The worker nodded and smiled. Electricity's back on. He flipped a switch. Lights blinked, flickered, then glowed golden through the entire mansion. Evelyn choked up. Clarence, look! Light! For years they had lived under dim bulbs and flickering lamps, always conserving electricity. Now the whole house shone. She leaned into Clarence, whispering, Feels like God turned the lights back on in our lives, too. As the sun slipped away, neighbors began to leave. One by one, they hugged the walkers, promising to return the next day. Clarence and Evelyn stood on their porch, hands intertwined as the mansion glowed behind them. We ain't rich yet, Clarence said softly. Evelyn smiled. No, baby, but we ain't poor no more either. They looked at the mansion, their mansion, alive again, and in that moment, their long, painful life of struggle shifted quietly into a new chapter. Not a dream, not a miracle, just a blessing finally arriving right on time. Night settled over the old mansion like a warm blanket, the newly restored lights glowing soft amber behind every window. The house no longer looked abandoned or haunted. It looked lived in. Loved, even. Clarence and Evelyn stood shoulder to shoulder on the porch, their silhouettes framed in golden light. The cool night breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass from the yard, mixed with the faint odor of old wood warming under electricity for the first time in decades. Clarence sighed, the long, peaceful kind that empties years of stress from the lungs. Evie, he murmured, gazing at the stars that blinked faintly above the treetops. I keep wondering, how did two broke, tired old folks like us end up standing on the porch of a mansion? Evelyn chuckled softly, leaning into him. We ain't broke no more, Clarence. He smiled. No, we sure ain't. But then her voice softened, becoming almost a whisper carried by the wind. You know what I keep thinking about? All them nights we slept in that tiny room in the boarding house, praying we'd make it through the winter. All them dinners we skipped so we could pay rent. The times I thought I'd failed you as a wife because I couldn't give you a home. Clarence turned to her, placing his rough, work-worn hands on her cheeks. Evelyn Walker, you gave me everything. You gave me hope when we didn't have food. You gave me faith when the world broke me. You kept us alive when life tried to bury us. Don't you dare say you failed me. Tears filled her eyes. They weren't the painful kind. They were the healing kind. The kind that washed away a lifetime of carrying burdens alone. She wiped them gently with a shaky laugh. Clarence, for once, I feel like the world finally saw us. He nodded, staring out into the dark yard where neighbors had worked all day, their footprints still pressed into the soft earth. They did, he said, and maybe that's the whole point. Sometimes you spend your whole life thinking nobody sees your kindness, nobody notices your struggle, nobody cares about folks who ain't got money or fancy names. He squeezed her hand, voice thick with emotion. But God sees, Evie. God remembers. And sometimes he saves the biggest blessings for the folks who learned how to live without him. The breeze picked up, rustling the porch swing. The mansion behind them creaked quietly, shifting as if settling into its new beginning. Evelyn turned, admiring the warm light spilling from the windows. Clarence, look at this house. We came here with nothing but hope. And a bucket, Clarence joked. She nudged him gently. I'm being serious. I know, baby, he said, kissing the top of her head. Go on. She stepped to the railing and leaned forward, her voice soft but steady, almost like she was speaking to her younger self, the tired woman who once cried silently into a cold pillow. We weren't looking for treasure, she said. We weren't trying to get rich. All we wanted was somewhere to belong. Clarence joined her, placing his hand over hers. And somehow, she continued, we found both. They stood like that for a long moment, letting the truth of their journey settle around them. The wind whispered through the trees. A distant dog barked. Inside the mansion, one of the new light bulbs flickered softly, casting dancing shadows across the porch window. Finally, Evelyn spoke one last time, her voice carrying the weight of a lifetime and the warmth of a new beginning. Life tried to break us, she said quietly, but instead, it brought us home. Clarence looked at her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever been given. Evie, this house ain't the miracle. She raised an eyebrow. No? He shook his head gently. You are. Your kindness, your strength, your faith, that's what got us here. She swallowed hard. Then we made it together, she whispered. He nodded. Yeah, we sure did. The camera would pull back here if this were a film, the two of them standing in front of the glowing mansion. Small figures against the wide night sky, but strong, unshakable. A lifetime of pain behind them, a future of peace ahead. A final line lingers in the quiet air, spoken like a blessing over everything they've survived. Sometimes the things abandoned by others are exactly where your blessing waits.